You know what's interesting about people with extremely high IQs? They rarely look the way we expect them to. Most people picture someone with a very high IQ as obviously impressive, constantly confident, solving problems out loud, making sure the room is aware of their intelligence. But psychology research consistently tells a very different story. Many of the behavioral patterns most commonly found in people with extremely high IQs don't look like intelligence at all, and some of them actually look like the opposite. What cognitive psychologists have found after decades of studying highly intelligent individuals is that a very high IQ doesn't just make a person smarter, it changes the entire way a person processes the world. And that difference shows up in very specific, very recognizable ways. Here are 11 psychological traits that research consistently finds in people with extremely high IQs. Sign 1. They spend a lot of time alone. The first trait is a strong preference for solitude. Highly intelligent people often spend significant amounts of time alone, not because they dislike other people, but because their brains are constantly processing. The prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for complex reasoning, planning, and deep reflection, tends to function most effectively in quiet environments, without external distraction. For a high IQ brain, solitude isn't loneliness, it's fuel. Research published by the London School of Economics found something that seems counterintuitive at first. Highly intelligent individuals reported significantly lower life satisfaction from frequent social interaction compared to people with average IQs. Their brains, in other words, don't always recharge the way most people's do. They recharge from stillness. This doesn't mean high IQ people are antisocial or difficult to be around. It means their cognitive systems work at a depth that requires quiet time to function at full capacity. Social interaction is engaging, but it's also cognitively expensive for a brain that's always analyzing every layer of what's happening in a room. Sign 2. Their minds never fully switch off. The second trait is a mind that never truly quiets down. People with very high IQs frequently report that their thinking doesn't stop. Not during rest, not late at night, not during activities that most people find relaxing. There's always a background process running, turning over a problem, revisiting a conversation, building a theory, running mental simulations for things that haven't happened yet. Psychologist Kazimierz Zdrowski studied this extensively in gifted individuals and described it through his theory of over-exitabilities. He found that highly intelligent people experience what he called psychotic over-exitability, a restless internal energy that expresses itself mentally rather than physically. A drive to think that doesn't have a natural off switch. Neuroscientist Rex Young's research at the University of New Mexico found that higher intelligence is associated with richer connectivity between distant regions of the brain, not just faster processing in isolated areas. The highly intelligent brain doesn't just think more quickly. It makes connections across a much larger network of ideas simultaneously, all the time. That constant connectivity is what makes rest difficult. The brain isn't malfunctioning. It's doing exactly what it was built to do. Sign 3. They feel things more deeply than they show. The third trait is one that surprises people the most when they encounter it in the research. There's a widespread assumption that high intelligence comes with emotional detachment, the cold, rational thinker who lives entirely in the mind. But psychology research directly contradicts this picture. People with significantly elevated IQs actually tend to feel things with greater intensity than average, not less. Zdrowski identified this as emotional over-excitability, a heightened responsiveness to emotional stimuli that makes high IQ individuals acutely sensitive to beauty, music, injustice, and the suffering of others. A study published in the journal Intelligence found that higher measured IQ correlated with significantly greater emotional reactivity and emotional depth, particularly in response to art, moral questions, and human behavior. The reason this trait is so often invisible is that highly intelligent people also tend to be very good at rags longer than necessary. Sign 4. They're comfortable saying, "I don't know." The fourth trait is intellectual humility. This one surprises people because we tend to assume high intelligence produces high confidence. But psychology research consistently shows the opposite pattern. People with very high IQs are far more likely to acknowledge the limits of their knowledge than people with average IQs. And they do it genuinely, not as a social performance. This connects directly to the Dunning-Kruger effect, the well-documented finding that lower competence often produces overconfidence because the person doesn't know enough to see the complexity that exists in a domain. Highly intelligent people, by contrast, understand that complexity intimately. They've thought deeply enough and encountered enough exceptions to see how much remains genuinely uncertain. So when a high IQ person says, "I don't know," it's not hesitation, it's precision. And it's one of the most reliable markers of genuine intelligence that psychology has identified. The person who holds every opinion with absolute certainty, regardless of evidence, is almost never the most intelligent person in the room. Sign 5. They struggle to find people who think at their level. The fifth trait is one that highly intelligent people rarely talk about openly, but that research shows is nearly universal among them. They find it genuinely difficult to find people they can fully connect with intellectually. Not because they believe they're superior to others, but because conversations that don't go deep enough, or people who aren't interested in the same kinds of questions, leave them feeling a very specific kind of unstimulated. Psychologist Law Hollingworth, who spent decades studying highly gifted adults, identified what she called the problem of stimulus poverty, the experience of a mind that can't find sufficient challenge or depth in its immediate environment. What she observed wasn't arrogance, it was a quiet longing for real conversation, for someone who could follow them all the way to the bottom of an idea without needing to turn back. The result is that highly intelligent people sometimes appear aloof or distant, not because they lack social ability, but because they've learned from experience that most conversations aren't built to hold the depth they require. So they hold back, they calibrate themselves down, and a lot of who they actually are never enters the room at all. Sign 6. They change their minds when the evidence changes. The sixth trait is cognitive flexibility. Highly intelligent people tend to treat beliefs as working theories rather than fixed identities. When new information appears, information that directly contradicts what they previously believed, their brain updates the model. They don't experience changing their mind as a threat to who they are. They experience it as accuracy. In psychology, this is called cognitive flexibility, and it's one of the most consistent markers of advanced problem-solving ability. The brain of a highly intelligent person isn't attached to being right about any specific thing. It's interested in having the most accurate possible picture of reality, even when that means discarding something it previously held with confidence. From the outside, this can look like inconsistency. A person who shifts positions can appear unreliable. But what's actually happening is the opposite of uncertainty. It's a mind running a continuous, honest update process. The people who never change their minds, regardless of new evidence, are almost never the most intelligent people in the room. Sign 7. They observe far more than they say. The seventh trait is a preference for observation over expression. In conversations and group settings, highly intelligent people often default to watching before speaking. They listen to what isn't being said as much as to what is. They pick up on the patterns in social dynamics, who defers to whom, where the real tension is, what the conversation is actually about beneath the surface level, before they contribute anything. Research on social intelligence and general cognitive ability consistently shows that higher IQ correlates with greater accuracy in reading social cues and emotional signals. But it also means high IQ individuals often need more time to process what they're observing before they respond. They're not slower thinkers, they're gathering more data first. This creates a frustrating and common misread. The quiet, observing person is frequently assumed to have the least to contribute. In reality, they're often the one with the most complete picture of what's actually happening. Sign 8. They procrastinate hardest on the work that matters most. The 8th trait is one that highly intelligent people often find deeply confusing about themselves. The projects with the most personal meaning, the work with the greatest potential, are frequently the hardest to begin. Smaller, lower-stakes tasks get done with ease. The work that could genuinely represent their full capability seems to live permanently at the edge of starting. Researchers studying high cognitive ability individuals found that this pattern isn't laziness. It's a form of what they called complexity awareness. Before beginning a significant piece of work, a high IQ brain comprehends the full scope of what excellence would require. Every flaw the finished product might contain, every way it could fall short of the standard the mind can already clearly see. Psychologist Carol Dweck's research identified this as particularly common in gifted individuals. A fear not of failure exactly, but of the gap between internal vision and external output. The procrastination isn't an absence of care, it's the presence of too much of it. The work that never starts is almost always the work that matters the most. Sign 9. They get bored faster than almost anyone around them. The 9th trait is a low tolerance for repetition and a constant need for novelty. Highly intelligent people tend to habituate quickly, meaning they need more novel input to maintain the same level of engagement that most people get from familiar routines. Not just in obvious situations like slow meetings or repetitive tasks. At a neurological level, the stimulus that satisfied yesterday doesn't satisfy at the same level today. Neuroscientific research has linked higher cognitive ability to higher baseline dopamine activity in the prefrontal cortex, the brain's reward system for new information and intellectual challenge. When that challenge disappears, the signal drops sharply. The restlessness isn't a mood, it's a physiological response to insufficient stimulation. This is why highly intelligent people often pursue multiple interests simultaneously, change careers more than once, or find themselves strangely dissatisfied in situations that seem, from the outside, perfectly comfortable. The brain isn't being ungrateful. It's running a search for what it was built to find. Sign 10. They question themselves more than anyone would expect. The 10th trait is persistent self-doubt, and this one is directly connected to intelligence, not opposed to it. People with very high IQs often experience a degree of internal uncertainty that the people around them would find hard to believe. Not performative humility, genuine, recurring doubt about whether their thinking is as reliable as others seem to assume. Not because they're fragile, because they understand complexity too well to feel entirely certain about anything. This connects again to the Dunning-Kruger effect, but at the high end, the deeper your understanding of a subject, the more clearly you can see how much remains uncertain. The more you know, the more accurately you can see everything you don't know. Intelligence doesn't produce certainty. It produces a more precise map of how much territory remains unexplored. Psychologist Albert Ellis observed that highly intelligent individuals were frequently the most prone to holding their own output to a standard not applied to anyone else, and treating any gap between performance and potential as evidence of fundamental inadequacy. The doubt isn't a sign of lesser intelligence. It's often the most reliable signature of a greater one. Sign 11. They carry a quiet sense of not quite belonging. And the 11th trait is the one that ties all the others together. Highly intelligent people frequently report a quiet but persistent sense of not quite fitting in their social groups, their professions, sometimes in the world at large. Not a dramatic alienation, a subtle, ongoing awareness of being slightly out of sync with the immediate environment around them. This isn't a personality disorder or a social deficiency. It's the predictable result of experiencing the world at a different level of resolution than most of the people around you. When your brain processes more, connects more, feels more intensely, and requires more depth than the environment consistently offers. A mild sense of displacement is almost inevitable. Not because something went wrong, but because something works differently. Psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, whose decades of research on creativity and exceptional minds remain among the most important in cognitive psychology, found that individuals with the greatest intellectual capacity almost universally described their inner lives as the most complex, the most difficult to explain, and the hardest to share. Not because they were uniquely suffering, but because they were experiencing life at a level of detail that most people around them weren't. And living at that resolution changes what you notice, what you need, and what ordinary life is capable of giving you. What's interesting about all 12 of these traits is how consistently they're misread. The person who needs solitude looks antisocial. The one whose mind never stops looks anxious. The one who feels deeply looks unexpectedly sensitive. The one who doubts themselves looks uncertain. The one who doesn't quite fit anywhere looks like they're difficult. But sometimes what looks like a collection of quiet difficulties is actually something very specific. A mind that was built to process more, connect more, and go further than most of the environments it moves through every day. At its core, a very high IQ isn't just about knowing more or thinking faster. It's about experiencing the full complexity of the world with very little filter between you and it. And that, more than any test or number, is what makes it both the most powerful and the most demanding thing a person can carry. If this video described you today, leave a comment with the trait that felt most accurate. I read every single one. And if it gave language to something you've been carrying quietly for a long time, share it with someone who might need to hear it. I'm Turnizer. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next video. Goodbye, and see you next.